Hello there, book clubbers! Oh, I'm so excited this week. I'm Jeff Canada. I'm here with Lana Bashinsky. Hi, Lana.
Hello.
We have a very special episode for you this week. Our friend, A Critical Dragon, is with us. AP Canavan is here. Hi, AP.
Hi, Jeff. Hi, Lana. First thing, I have a couple of things to say. Number one, thank you so much for inviting me on. Number two, congratulations on finishing the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Thank you.
That's a huge undertaking, and you did it gracefully. And the third thing is, I wanted to say how much I greatly enjoyed following your journey. I was listening to the episodes. I mightn't have always commented, but I listened to them because the joy that you brought to reading and expressed about the reading, but the wonderful insights, both intellectual and academic, pointing those things out, but then the very personal. And it encompasses all of the greatness of what literature actually does. It's this very personal thing. We're looking at an author's encoding of something, and there's an intellectual component. We decode what's there, but we do it through a very personal filter. And people more like myself, like one of the issues, we get hung up on a lot of the academic sort of analysis side, and we forget that when we read for pleasure, it's about that personal. And I think the two of you brought so much of that to share with everyone else, to show both the personal side as well as the thoughtful engagement with what was there. And seeing both those things together is such a joy. So thank you both so much for that.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's extremely kind of you to say. And I think folks can already tell the level of discourse on this episode is going to be elevated quite a lot. If you are unfamiliar with A Critical Dragon, well, let us correct that. You should be subscribed to his YouTube channel because it's fantastic. And Lana and I guested 2 years ago. It shocks me to report. When we were about to start House of Chains, we had just gotten to House of Chains in our journey, and we were very graciously invited by AP onto his channel, and we talked to him then, at which time I expressed the fact that if it wasn't for AP and A Critical Dragon, we would never have even done Malazan, because that was one of the big ways that I discovered the books and got excited about doing the books and pitched the idea to Lana. So we owe you a huge debt of gratitude for making that even on my radar at all. So thank you in return.
And I feel like I have an abundance of content to digest. When we started, because of the way that Jeff teed it off to me, I was like, I don't want smarter thoughts than mine. I want to see what is the challenge level? What is the confusion level? What makes this book something that people regard as being this challenging fantasy series? I want to see if I can make it on my own. But even just earlier today, I was able to watch one of your videos, and now I'm like, oh, I got gym content for the next eternity, going through it all, feeling the feels, getting the smart guy vibes. Ooh, I'm excited.
Well, let me just really quick say we should tell everybody that we are going to spoil Malazan, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. All 10 books are open for discussion in the following discussion we're going to have. So be aware that we may spoil any bit of the series, because this is a kind of part of our celebration of getting to the end and talking to AP about it, because I consider AP one of the foremost experts on the series. So no, he did. Well, Steve Erickson told us not to believe anything you say. So there is that.
Yeah. No, who are you going to believe? Someone who specializes in analyzing literature to try and bring forth truth, or someone who for a living makes stuff up?
Wow.
Because that's what authors do. They tell us
liar.
very pretty little lies.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's get into it. When we were on your channel, and I hope folks have seen that, or we'll link to it in the description of this video as well. But you told the story of meeting Steven Erickson for the first time, and it was wonderful. So I won't make you retell it here. But I am curious, what made you start A Critical Dragon? What is the origin story of your YouTube channel?
Well, Erickson's involved again. But Philip Chase, so the best of fantasy with Philip Chase, like, he has his own YouTube channel. Philip had been putting out some videos about fantasy literature, and I'm like, oh, well, I'll go and have a look at this. And he was talking all about, the history of fantasy and all that, and I'm like, you left this out. And I had left a couple of comments on some of his videos because it just so happened that's what my PhD was in. Like, I'd studied a lot of this. Philip's PhD, despite the fact that he claims he's Dr. Fantasy, is in medieval literature. My PhD is in fantasy literature.
Who's the real Dr. Fantasy?
But we ended up having a couple of conversations, and we recorded a video. And then Philip said, like, you should start a YouTube channel. And Erickson got wind of this, and he went, "Hey, B, you should do a YouTube channel." And the two of them bullied me into it.
A loving bully. A loving bully.
That's kind of how I got Lana, a little bully action.
And I have to admit, I'm really glad that they did, because I had, for example, opportunities like this to meet and speak with the two of you, which is so wonderful. The friendship I've developed with my nemesis, Philip Chase, that has been phenomenal. And the number of people that I've gotten to speak to and exchange ideas with, because, like I said at the beginning, reading quite often can be very solitary. And particularly if you're a literature academic, a lot of time it's like, oh, I'm going to sit and read this book and think my thoughts. And you're always in your own head or delving into a book. That suddenly there was this whole community aspect of it. And for all of the ills that maybe we might pin on modern technology and social media and all of this sort of stuff, one of the greatest strengths is it's brought people from all parts of the world together with shared passions and shared thoughts, the exchange of ideas. And as much as, modern society has its issues, but the communities that have formed where people are positively interacting show the strength that humanity can reach. And I think that's something actually we see in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, that we see that when we reach out with empathy and understanding and we get these different perspectives, it can reshape our perspective of what we thought was set in stone. And we suddenly realize, looking at it at a slightly different angle, this is an entirely different thing. And that's something that Erickson explores all the way through the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And it's something that sharing our thoughts about narrative allows people not only into how we see it, but it helps them refine how they see it. And it's this constant exchange. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
That's lovely. I mean, that's a lot of what we were talking about last week on our show too. This what a gift the community has been around this, as you put it, very solitary experience. It's been wonderful, and I agree with that. And it's great to see that you have experienced it as well. Let's dig into Malazan a little bit. I want to get to more general narrative fiction, genre fiction stuff too in our discussion. But let's start with Malazan, because one of the things that we, and again, spoilers, everybody, spoilers. One of the things that we came to with the Crippled God, with getting to the end of the Crippled God, is this notion of the Book of the Fallen being authored, cobbled together, brought about by the Crippled God in some fashion. And then the idea of a reread, having that sort of in the back of one's mind as they, re-experience all of the words. You've done a number of great videos on this very topic. One with Stephen himself, and there's a solo one that's great. It's a half an hour. I would highly recommend folks check it out. But it's still a very complicated topic to me, because you talked about this sort of nested narrative structure where, as Toll the Hounds as a cipher for the entire series being an example, because in Toll the Hounds, of course, we have Krupp as the narrator, is sort of a lesson in how the narrative of the entire series is meant to be viewed as sort of I don't want to say an unreliable narrator, but as a history that is passed down and interpreted through the viewpoint of the narrator itself, which I did a terrible job of explaining, and I'm sure you'll do a better one. But can we talk about that a little bit?
Talk about what? I have no idea what you're talking about.
The notion of the crippled god having some authorial voice over the whole series.
Right. So if you remember all the way back in Gardens of the Moon, the opening poem before you get to the prologue, that's we're going to open this book, this old book with its oil-stained pages. So if we think of that, the physical thing as the Book of the Fallen, someone created that.
Right.
And at the end of this, as you pointed out in your 2 episodes ago, the last episode of the Crippled God, he promises to write the Book of the Fallen. So then when we get to the end of this, we get, now the pages are being closed up. So the Malazan Book of the Fallen, this 10-volume epic that we have just read, we can think of it as this magical religious text that the crippled god Kamansod created. And people go, oh, well, how was he going to know these things? And you go, right, if you're going to write about the Odyssey, do you think there was someone there the whole time with Odysseus writing all of, oh, well, he definitely said that here, that these are the events? Or in Saving Private Ryan, do you think that they had found footage of what happened on the beach? But we don't dispute that that's representative of what one of the beach landings was like. But people get very hung up, quite understandably, because of how we think about narrators, but they get hung up on, well, how did the crippled god know this? And you go, well, first of all, he's a divine figure. Second of all, we know that he has when he ascends in his spirit form, how much information is he taken from all around him? And how much of it is extrapolated from the various people that worshipped him, that they were accessible to him, he was accessible to them, and there was an exchange of ideas. He has a lot of information about what went on. And one of the reasons why I think thinking about it as him writing is when we read through the first time without knowing that the potential antagonist of the entire series is actually the author, we judge everything from point of view. So when you're following Whiskey Jack, you're seeing Whiskey Jack's view of the world. The crippled god would not see Whiskey Jack in that moment the way that Whiskey Jack sees himself. And so there's a very deliberate sort of authorial meaning behind writing it from your opponent's perspective. And he chooses to show, Kamansod chooses to show some of the absolute worst things that he has ever done. And he shows it from those people who could judge him most severely, but also these people who end up, despite all of these things, sacrificing everything to free him. And it's his trying to understand this. Here are all of these pieces. This is the story of how he was released from the world, how Byrne, if you want to call the planet that, is changed and he is no longer imprisoned there. So it's the story of his release. But he doesn't tell it from his point of view. Because again, as you point out, he gets dragged down. He's broken apart. He's tortured. He's chained. People drain him of energy. He's twisted. And he sees this entire world as evil. So if he told it solely from his point of view, then you couldn't understand any of the things that happen. And so he tells it from their point of view, which makes us think about, well, hang on, how many conflicts or even how many relationships in this world exist with multiple points of view? Because when we see it, we go, but here's all of this evidence. And they go, well, you're not thinking of X, Y, and Z. You forgot to include that. That's what I'm seeing. And so there's an entire entreaty when you reread it, that now you're no longer reading for the events because you know what's happening. But now you're constantly in the back of your head going, why would Kamansod choose to show this? Why is Kamansod showing us this particular exchange? What does this exchange mean to someone who thought that all of humanity was terrible, who thought that all of humanity were horrible, that all of humanity needed to be destroyed? Why is he showing camaraderie? Why is he showing these people change? Why is he showing Karsa's journey, where the limited perspective that Karsa has at the beginning of his journey causes him to do such horrendous and vile things? But when confronted with a new perspective and new experiences, he reevaluates his worldview. Oh, I wonder why Kamensod, this god that has been tortured and hates the people on this world for being demons and tearing them apart, why he might value teaching and talking about stories that show the highs and lows of all of these experiences from these people that ultimately, at the end, sacrificed so much to free him despite what he had done.
It's so interesting. I've reflected a lot on Jeff and my last episode chatting, where Jeff sort of asked a similar question, like what are the feels there with Kamensod being the author? And I feel like I'm living between two worlds, where at the time we're like, it can't be, and since then I've come around to, but also it must be. I haven't. This will be the juxtaposition of this episode, where Jeff will have very well thought out and well researched questions, and I'm floating on my vibes. But one of the things that strikes me as very interesting and compelling about the reread, well, let me back up one sec. So much people are like, I can't wait for when you reread these books already. Book 2, book 3, I can't wait for you to reread these books. And knowing they had so many books ahead of us, it's crazy to think about why that would be so exciting, because why it's so exciting becomes razor sharp in the last chapter of the last book. But one of the hints that I got that would make it even more compelling to like really dwell on is Bug being able to see through a single tear in somebody's eyes in the desert to get a sense of where they're at. And even charting through the reread, like who are the worshipers or the people that Kamensod is able to see through the eyes of or get the sense of because of their situation. And it's not necessarily like a physical, a crippled state as the crippled god, where that was reflected in Banishar's alcoholism, and he's crippled emotionally by this dependency with alcohol. It would be very interesting to go through the reread and see the journey of not even extrapolations of this is what we think is a representation of this moment, but who within these scenes are we charting that doesn't even know that they have this connection to the crippled god because of some level of brokenness within them as a person, emotionally or physically.
If you think of the entire cast of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, name one character who isn't broken in some way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like even Tehol, and you could sort of go like, Tehol, he's so funny, and we love seeing, and his relationship with Bug, with Mail is so funny. But you hear Tehol's backstory, you see his relationship with his family, you see that a lot of his humor is a defense mechanism. Mm-hmm. Because he's trying to protect himself. He's trying to hide these things, the things that he feels, and he's trying to hide all that. That's an aspect that so many of us can recognize. But every character has broken moments, because being broken is being human. That when we talk about, we found the perfect person, what we generally mean is that their breaks and flaws and fractures match perfectly with our breaks, and we sort of click together. That it's not that they are an absolute paragon. It's that their humanity fits perfectly with our humanity, and that's it. We're all flawed creatures, and we're all trying to do our best, or at least I hope we are. And we don't always succeed, but
right.
And that's the beauty of this is, I think some people complain about Erickson's philosophizing and they think it's a bit didactic. And at the same time, they complain about, he's so pro this and pro that. Well, apart from like when he's not. And you realize so much of it it's an exploration. It's an invitation to explore concepts. Right. And instead of just saying, think about this thing, it's let me play out an example. Let me show you how this plays out. And like a clear example of this, if you remember back in Deadhouse Gates and Fellison, everything that Fellison goes through, and people, well, why didn't someone just magically heal her?
Right.
And then we have the story in Midnight Tides I've temporarily forgotten her name. The like the sort of the warden
Story of
character.
my life.
Which one?
She ends up with being pregnant and the blade under the door.
I can picture the scenes, and I'm not the right person for the names.
But there's a sort of a remark about when she had returned to the city.
Saren Pedek.
Yeah, Saren Pedek. Sorry, that's absolutely perfect.
Wow, well, Lana, out of nowhere with the,
I did it one time. Count it.
And instead of depicting the abuse that she goes through, it's sort of told to us, but we have that scene of her walking into the water and the desire to be cleaned, and we know that there's a lot more to it than that, and in fact it's the desire to end.
Right.
And then we get that whole thing with the Crimson Guard where they teach her, no, you can self-heal.
Right. Oh, and my God, what a beautiful.
So where Fellison doesn't heal at all and is broken and lashes out, Saren Pedek finds a mentor who says, I can't heal you, but I'll talk you through how to heal yourself. And then we have Janeth, or sorry, what did you call her? Janice?
Janeth.
And in that, it's Mail uses healing to go, I'm just going to wipe it all away.
Yeah.
And so here we have three, not exactly the same, but similar instances where Erikson plays out different potential ways that readers have always talked about. Well, why didn't you just do? Or that's not realistic that didn't happen. And here they're all played out so that each time we can play through and understand and work out what kind of this would look like. And yet one of the things that we find in discourse is people go, well, I didn't like how that one was done. And you're like, well, yeah, it's showing us a different version of something earlier. Right. And even then, when people say, oh, well, they never deal with the ramifications, and we see the story of Stoney and Harlow. And that, well, it wasn't done at the time. You're like, well, yeah, it's because you don't answer all of the questions. You have to give people time to think about them. Or at least Erikson believes that people should be given time to think through things. And that, for me, is something that's quite important in this series, is when we look at all of these different aspects where we can see mirrors of the character arcs in other characters, where we can see singular moments where there's a lot of what Erikson describes as elliptical writing, coming back to the same idea but from a slightly different direction, or re-ringing a bell of something that happened previously. But each time it's to try and shift focus to make us consider it from a different perspective. Because I think one of the dangers that we run into constantly is we go, this is the way that something must be done. And I am sure that this is the way. We are certain. And we are seeing it through our lens. And if we think of all of the characters in the series who are absolutely certain that they know exactly what's going on. There's the Leosin.
Including Jeff and Lana.
Well, there's the Leosin and there's the Forkel Asil.
Yeah.
They're the only two types of people in this series who are absolutely certain about something. And we can see how devastating and destructive it is. Yeah. All of the others are operating going, I think this is the way to do it. We'll see. Here, just throw a cusser at it. You know.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of Erikson's plea. That's part of his question to us is, I am not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to show you these things and give you the freedom to explore them. And then you will come up with your own way of understanding. And to me, it is both incredibly didactic, because this is what you want the teacher to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's not didactic in the way that people mean, which is you must think this. So I think that's useful. And bringing Kamensaud back into it, again, it's this constant thought of, why would this being want us to consider these factors?
Yeah, one of the things I heard you say that really recontextualized the whole series for me in a really cool way was, if you can imagine, Kamensaw saying, these mortals, these humans, after I was a total jerk, these humans showed compassion to me. Let me explain to you why. Okay, so these bone hunters, in order for me to explain the bone hunters, I have to explain the bridge burners. Okay, well, in order to explain the bridge burners, I have to, and it's basically like somebody, in order to tell the tale, has to expand the circle of focus
Context.
out and out and out into this 10 novel series, which is, I suppose, kind of what Stephen Erickson was doing as well. But it's a really cool, I think, recontextualization of that of that notion of, in order for me to even process this moment of compassion that was so transformative and allowed me this freedom, here is how much I have to tell you, which is such a cool way to think about it, I think.
And even just with your examples that you pulled, I again have kept myself distant from as much of the discourse, or like the things that people are already talking about the books, as much as possible, knowing the frustration. And admittedly, I was like number one Fellowson hater when we were going through the early books. If we recall, I've changed my tune, but seeing that examination and that elliptical writing with Fellowson and Stani and Saren and Janeth, the different outcomes, but also like their different stations and what resources did they have. Janeth is like, yes, there was a different regime and for a while making some really gnarly choices around Letherus, but she is like a high level scholar who then is married to the king. Like all the resources in the world, it makes sense that she could have the snap finger treatment, where Fellowson was, had potential resources, but then ousted by her family as like the best case scenario, and then is trying to like claw her way back into finding any balance of normalcy in her life and feeling like she had to do this independently. It makes sense why she would either reject that, wouldn't have access to it. It's interesting to see even the reactions to that for a community who of people who gravitate to these books and like to pull it apart. There seems like there's always another layer to consider, to be more empathetic, to be more compassionate, and to find more understanding for these people that are written into this world and the scenarios in which they find themselves.
Yeah, but even with Fellowson, like Fellowson is deeply unpleasant.
Mm-hmm.
And it can make you uncomfortable, and you can feel that when you're reading, that you're like, oh, why can't she be nicer? Why can't she just get over it? Because that mirrors what we see in real life.
Mm-hmm.
Like when something absolutely terrible happens and people are understanding for a day, 2 days, maybe even a week, and then a week later, like, are you still wallowing?
Yeah.
And you're like, we can get really, really annoyed. And Erickson writes Fellowson as deeply unpleasant. But at the same time, we are privy to information about this. And it's the challenge. It's really easy to be compassionate to people you like and love.
Yes.
But someone who has been so deeply wounded, and this is like from experience and from what I've heard from other people, Fellowson's portrayal is very, very realistic for that particular state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And can we extend compassion to people who treat us badly? Can we extend compassion to, oh, I know that you're hurting, but like you're just being mean to me? How that is the challenge. And I know in my life, I have pushed people away for various reasons, and yet some of them kept fighting their way back, despite my behavior, despite the things that I had said and done. They fought their way back to me despite me. And those are people, like, you look at them and go, how did you find the patience and the compassion and the empathy to do that when I was in that state and so deeply unpleasant?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, you were hurting.
Mm-hmm.
And their recognition of that and their selfless actions where I was inflicting pain on them, you look at that and it is stunning. Whereas when people go, oh yeah, but I really like that you're a bit sad today, that's easy for us to extend compassion to. That's not the test.
Right. It's like, it reminds me of like, the test for free speech is the most despicable speech, right? Is that it's easy to have free speech when we're all cool with it. The test is when it's vile. So yeah, the harder it is, the more you have to actually step up and do the work. The other thing I want to bring up to you, I shared this with Lana earlier today. I think the single most profound video that I have watched about Malazan, bar none, is your video from just a few months ago that's entitled something about shadow, and it's not just about compassion. Which is which, first of all, sir, you just turned the camera on and like monologued for a half an hour with no notes, and it's incredible. So that's not cool, because clearly I can't do that. But it is I think a really well reasoned look at, I think, a side of the entire series' themes that I don't think most people, certainly I didn't grok right away. And it makes so much sense, because obviously we talk so much about compassion and empathy and sacrifice. And that's what, Lana and I came away from the series really moved by that stuff, and deservedly so, right? That is a major part of the themes and what the books are about. We've talked a bit about that already here. But you make such an amazing point about sort of the static nature of fantasy fiction, and the thesis statement across all the Malazan books, Ian C. Esselmont's included, about the need to sort of progress and not keep things static, and I think, chains as such a powerful metaphor across the series really reinforces that too. And things that are chained and forced to stay in one spot, as opposed to being able to move forward and progress. I just was so impressed by that thesis. I wonder if you could maybe talk a bit about it here as well.
Yeah, you see, now I have to think of it all back in my head again and then try and come up. If you'd sent me this in advance, I could have got, hang on, what was I thinking of that day? I'd obviously been hit in the head.
We got to bring you to our level, AP.
That's right.
It's the only way that we can keep up.
You wanted the smart version, go to a Critical Dragon. You want the hit in the head version, here we are on the DLC Book Club. You talked about the mutability of shadow and male with water, and the sort of mutability as this very human thing, as opposed to the gods and the Teist, different versions of the Teist that are very stuck and stayed and inflexible.
And the idea of progress as atypical to common fantasy criticisms.
I'm going to do the Malazan trick. In order to explain that thing, let me go back a bit. So if you say, in a lot of the fantasy series that we read, the fantasy stories that we love, there's a certain status quo to the world. And although they appear as very ancient worlds, it's almost like this secondary world has actually been encased in amber, and it's the outside of the amber that actually ages, but what's inside doesn't, because they walk along, oh look, it's elven ruins, and at the bottom there's a 10 by 10 room guarded by some orcs, and there's there are all of these elven ruins, and you go, well, where's the city that built up around? Oh, it's a ruined city. And well, how long's your city? Oh, our city's been here for thousands of years. And the numbers get thrown around, but there doesn't seem to be the same mutability that we would see in a quote unquote realistic world. Not that they would suddenly have to have modern technology, but that even if we look at Earth's history, no matter what place, the fluidity and the changes that populations undergo over thousands of years, it's extraordinary. And that complexity is very difficult to create in a fantasy world, particularly when you're trying to establish a new world. And so there are certain tropes put in place that authors utilize in order to create this shorthand so that people can understand it. And of course, Esselmont and Erickson, one of the things that they did with the series, it wasn't subversion for subversion's sake. It wasn't undermining of tropes just to undermine them. They knew fantasy inside and out. They knew what the tropes were. They knew the things that annoyed them. They knew the things that were a bit weird that fantasy just does. And so they wanted to play with that. And one of the things that we find in a lot of these fantasy worlds is that they are incredibly static. That, oh, look, they all have swords. These swords come from all periods of history, but everyone's walking around with a sword. And you're like,
but not only that, right? It's also that it's idealized. The staticness is idealized, right? It's the Shire is the place that is just it's so familiar and quaint and stuck in one piece of time. And in order for it to be saved, it must never be, move past that because it's so perfect and beautiful and heartwarming.
Yeah, and so fantasy does this a lot, and I think one of the fascinating things with the Malazan world, we actually see technology change and shift over the course of the books, because Moranth munitions at the beginning are this relatively new innovation that the Malazans have brought in, and they got them from an isolationist nation. They got them from the Moranth, but they have integrated them into their armed forces. Sappers went from the traditional, we're going to dig trenches and dig mines and undermine things, to, hey, we've got explosives. We see how the squad formation changes. We see, is it Fiddler or Hedge is the one that designs the crossbow to go, but I think I can lob custards further with this now.
Yeah.
And the experimentation with this, we see the integration of more and more squad mages. Instead of just having your, here's our artillery being all of the high mages together. It's like, no, every squad's going to have a mage. There are all of these, they're minor talents, but we'll integrate that into our battle. Even the fabric or the makeup of the squads themselves, it's not all infantry. It's, well, we have a couple of heavies, we have a couple of sappers, we have a mage, we have, and again, it's that building out of a very flexible, which people recognize as a quest group, where everyone has these different roles so that they can individually as a small group, they can cope with a whole load of different problems because they have so many tools available at their disposal. But that's quite different to how we see fantasy armies being done elsewhere. David Eddings is like, each country in David Eddings' Belgariad, they have like, oh, it's the Drasnian pikemen, and they all have pikes, and that's, oh, it's the Cherrick berserk warriors, and they're all Viking warriors running down. Like the Tolnedran Legion, and they're basically Roman soldiers, centurions, and every country just has one type of soldier.
It's like playing Civilization.
So there are all of these things about getting locked in, and the reductiveness and the simplicity of concepts within fantasy that Erickson and Nesselmont are playing with. And this big thing is change, mutability, the ability. Now, I know for American audiences, if we use the term progressive or progress, there, in this day and age, there are other connotations to that. But simply as moving forward, as whether or not it is a good thing or a bad thing in this context, we don't know. We don't know what the future of the Malazan world is. But here's a world where the god got called down. And from that point on, yes, cities rise and fall, but the world isn't changing. It's locked in this conflict because every piece of the crippled god that's found is rechained. They're locked back into this sin of the past, this thing that happened in the past. And no one can get past it. No one can change. And if it keeps locked like this, the world will die. Because a world that cannot change is doomed to fail. It must change, it must evolve. We see a lot of the elder gods, the Azathanai, they are locked into their one way of being. And in order to get them to change, they need an impetus. Look at Draconis. Draconis only changes because of how long did he spend in Dragnapur having a bit of a think. That was one long time out.
Sure.
Mael changes because he actually lives as a mortal with Tehol. He experiences the world from a completely different perspective instead of his divine sort of I am the god of oceans and the sea and all of that. Instead of that, he actually, no, I'm going to be a manservant and I'm going to walk among them and actually learning what this world is like. That forces him to change. And he is the most changeable of gods because water is constantly changing. Sea levels rise and fall. We have the tides, we have storms, floods. All of this would suggest that he is easy to change and be changeable, and yet it still requires enormous effort. And when we think of the Leosin, they are locked into, we are the light, basically the light elves. But instead of this being seen as good, they of course see themselves as a force for good because, yeah, we always think we're the good ones.
Yeah.
No one wakes up in the morning going, I'm the villain. We wake up in the morning
it's
thinking,
increasingly evidence to the contrary in some parts of the world.
But I think most people wake up and they go, right,
Yeah.
I know this is not going to be a popular thing, or I know this is not a nice thing to do, but I am justified in doing it. And the Leosin, because of
Right.
their worldview, feel that they are absolutely justified.
Right.
We see the same with the Fork Roll of Sail. They are locked at, we know what is best. We are justice. We will judge you. And you're like, based on what criteria? Where is your rubric? Can we please have a look at this adjudication? But they're locked into that worldview. And because of that sort of static nature of the power, these gods trying to avoid convergences. And what disrupts the balance? Shadow Throne and Cotillion. To humans who become gods. So yes, they are both of the divine, but they're also mortal. They're in that kind of in between. They are ascendants. So there's an element of unconventional thinking to who they are. They are the gods of shadow, and shadow is a realm that's already broken into pieces. It has no fixed shape. It will flow and change and adapt to the territory around it. And the major actors that we have in this, we see like the Eater being very important. Yeah, because the Teist Leosin, light. The Taistandi, they're darkness and they're emo and they're like, well, we'll just sit around, nothing's worth doing. And again, they've been locked into this, but the Eater are involved in the mortal world. And it's not necessarily a good thing, but it does cause their conflict with Letherus causes change on that part of Letheri. There's change caused. When we see all of these movements, why are the Malazans at the heart of it? It's not because the Malazans are inherently good, but they are this mutable force that wants to move forward, that wants to see change. For all that the Wiccans, Kellanvid's favorite people that he loved, he stepped in with the Empire to stop them constantly killing one another. But that involved a destruction of an element of their society, an element of their culture, but it did allow them a future to move on. That it's not all negative and destructive. There were some positives. It's a cost benefit, but it's change. And that's what we see throughout. That Shadow Throne and Cotillion, the Warren of Shadow, and all of these elements are associated with adapting to what is there and constantly seeking different ways forward. Not a singular way, but a different way, and adapting to what's happening. And they flow around things, they make multiple plans. When one plan fails, they move to another. Everyone else seems locked in this stasis, this locked in their worldview. This is the way to do things. And it's only when that's challenged by the Malazans, by the bridge burners, the bone hunters, only through conflicts like this, that some people are forced to change. And I think that's an important element of the writing that we have, both in Erikson and I know you haven't read it, but in Esselmont's book as well. The power of the past to hold on to us, to chain us, this peer pressure from dead people that we call tradition. And it locks us in place and it blinds us to the bad aspects and it emphasizes the good aspects. And we call that nostalgia. And we forget about all of those terrible aspects. And we get locked into this, if only it could be like that again. And this is the right way to do things. Because people have been doing it this way for generations. And you're like, yes, and people were dying from polio for generations. It's a good thing we came along with a vaccine.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything you're saying here, there's three sort of thoughts. That first of all, you've given me mental peace to finally connect the haunted YouTube comment into this book in a way that makes my heart. I just feel relief in, somebody however long ago commented, all gods are ascended, but not all ascendants are gods. And I was like, what does that mean? What does it mean? For like weeks and weeks. But the clarity with which you're talking about this, and specifically Shadowthrone and Cotillion, they're not gods. They are ascended, but because they aren't gods and have been living in the God life, God realm, they are closer to mortals than they are to gods. It gives them that flexibility and to adapt and to push for change and make new progress on the world. Yeah, just close that circle for me. It feels so good. Love that. Two, I think the tiniest scene that feels very resonant with this as well is that at the end of the book with Hedge and Fiddler and their relationship, Hedge dies because of his choices, and he saves people, the result of his choices and the pain it causes Fiddler. But him coming back is kind of a return, but then you see him trying to return again, trying to die in the same way, to try and be the hero, literally the same tactics, and him not succeeding in that tactic and not dying again is like a final defiance of these humans that are just by nature of being human, along with Shadowthrone and Cotillion, being affected by the progress. It's a final defiance of that idea of return, and I just think that's a very cool, tiny microcosm of that idea. But one of the things that I think is not at odds with that, but lives in an interesting space now, is GNU's choice to further not chain the god, but identify the House of Chains as immortalized in the deck.
But that's a change in itself, right? Isn't that a change itself? It's changing the composition of the deck of dragons itself, right?
That's true, but it is also locking it in a way into the norm of what has been happening.
But it's also a recognition that the crippled god deserves to play the game. Because until then, the crippled god was a resource.
Yeah.
Right.
But by bringing him into the deck, it's a recognition as he is a player, an antagonist, not an antagonist and opponent, not just a villain, but one of the other powers that has a perspective, has motives, and that sort of thing. Even across the series, the deck of dragons is, corresponding to the Warrens, but we know that the Holds became the Warrens. And then in this series, we see how the Warrens change.
Yeah.
That this is, again, a sort of a development that, is it always just going to be a refinement and iteration on an idea, or will it ever actually change? And change is scary. Change can be very destructive. Change can be frightening, and change is not always good. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're left with at the end of the series is, while there are some wonderful, hopeful, and lovely moments, which you need after something, I think, as devastating as we have just gone through, at the same time, the future is unknown, and the unknown can be scary. I think the Talana Mass is a great example of this. Tool's story. You see Tool, our introduction to Tool in Gardens of the Moon, he appears up out of the ground, stabbing through someone. What do we see in the battle with the Four Colossal? The Talana Mass appearing up out of the ground, stabbing through. But we see Tool go through this change. He is a Talana Mass, but he's on his own. And then we see he becomes mortal. And we see his relationship with Hedon. And then that all goes terribly. So he falls back on what had gone before. He becomes Talana Mass again. But you cannot go back. You can't go back to that. And the whole story with Silver Fox, one of the big gripes that people have with Memories of Ice. Oh, if only they'd kept the Talana Mass and kept them to use them. Yeah, because it was inconvenient to free the slaves that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to go up to a bunch of slaves and go, you know what, I will free you later on, but I just need you to do this one more thing for me? Because there's always just one more thing. That's the point. If someone has been enslaved the way the Talana Mass were, who are we to say, well, just one more thing? No, that is an injustice. It needs to be addressed. but that results in an absolute change. And even some of the Tlana Mass, and this is something Esselmont explores, are not receptive to that. And we even see glimpses of this through the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because that's scary. What am I going to do now? It's not the same as it has always been.
Mm-hmm.
I have to find my own way forward. The change is frightening. Change can be incredibly destructive. And we see the loss of life, we see the cost. But do we get to the end of the crippled god? We look at the cost in the lives of all of these characters, some of whom we really love, some of whom we barely tolerated, some of whom we went, who was that? But we look at that cost and do we go, well, it wasn't worth it. They should have just kept him chained. And that's a question that we can get, and we can feel about it different ways.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the central question with Tavor, right? And everybody is asking it, the whole march toward their destination is this worth it? Is this, and we have, Blistig basically saying, hell no, it's not worth it. This she's going to get us all killed, and for what? And I think that question hangs over the entire endeavor the entire time, and it's powerful.
But we could look at evidence from the text to go, well, of course it was worth it, because Byrne is dying because of the presence of this alien infection. Right. And so if Blistig is made aware of that, would that convince him? Maybe, maybe not. And it's a piece of evidence that the reader is privy to.
Right.
But should we need that evidence? Here is a being who has been tortured in a way almost beyond imagination for hundreds of thousands of years, who's been put in so much pain, and we have the opportunity to end that pain and free them from perhaps the greatest injustice that has ever occurred. What do you mean, is it worth it?
Yeah. How does that help me particularly, though? I need to see how it touches my life before I can decide.
Well, but also, and juxtaposing that with the Atotral dragon, right? Who we have to chain at the end, who has also experienced this unimaginable torment and lives a life of pain and suffering and static, being frozen in amber and forced to, so even there we see two reflections of the same theme at play. It's just incredible.
Since when have we ever looked at an incredibly complex problem when, you know what, the answer is really, really simple. It's just this one thing, and it's going to work out everywhere. Because again, it's a process. It's progress. It's not the end. And there will always be more problems to overcome. We incrementally try to leave a better world behind us than we found. And I think that might be the intention of a lot of the characters, whether they know it or not, that they are trying to make the world a better place as they see it. And, this is something we used to be able to agree on. If you go back about 30 years, regardless of what side of politics that you were on, people would say, I want what's best for the country. Right. And you're like, well, I want what's best for the country. Well, I think what's best is this. I think that's a terrible idea, because I think what's best for the country is this thing. We would disagree maybe on the best measures to take and the time in which to take them and how to implement them. But we had that conversation. And yet where I grew up, a lot of it was, it wasn't a conversation like that. It was, well, we want this thing because it will make you look bad. And that's where I grew up.
Like, that's where we've arrived here. Yeah.
I wasn't making a comment about that, Jeff.
I will. Yeah. I will. I mean, that's and it becomes this. It becomes this zero-sum game, and that we lose that presumption that we both want the same thing and disagree on tactics. Now there's the accusation that you don't even want you are evil, and you are to be opposed at every step because you're you. And that's what's so heartbreaking.
And that's discourse breaks.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one of the things that I think is sort of, I guess, gentle on the how you need to consider this or how you need to be faced with that. Even when you make the choice and you're making the best possible choices are not always great for everybody, easy answers. So with Carabbas, the choice is, we chain them or she dies, and therefore everything dies. And the being able to be in her mind leading up to that, her lamenting like, well, I don't want to be this thing that destroys everything. Like she doesn't want that either, but she has limited options with what her existence happens to cause. And there's like such a deep tragedy there, but that even when they're making the choice of like, we have to change her or chain her or everything's gone, there's evidence leading up to it that gives you the sense that maybe that's what she would want too, because she doesn't want this destruction. She wants freedom, but the cost of her freedom is everything else dying. It's sort of an unanswered end to what she's thinking and feeling in the end there. That is sort of left for, I feel like, us as readers to think about what the implications are. But there's enough that there's sort of like a gentleness that's like, maybe this is this really hard decision wasn't the worst possible thing that could happen. It's like a kindness to us.
And again, and this is why I sometimes get frustrated where people say that Erikson is didactic and it's dictating things, because he leaves so much open to interpretation. He leaves these gaps and spaces within the narrative, within the text, that our imaginations inhabit and populate, that we have enough there to understand the thing, but in getting to the answer, to the solution, what it means, that he has trusted us to think it through and come up with something that makes sense to us. And that's why there are lots of people who like absolutely loathe certain characters, or they dislike certain books, and you're like, that's absolutely fine. You can dislike, you can loathe, you can think it could be done a different way. But it's when they say, well, this is badly written, and I'm like, okay, please supply your evidence. Why exactly? Well, it could have been shorter. You're like, no shit, everything can be shorter. It is one of the most frustrating things that literature, which is an art, should conform to the same standards as business writing. You're like, yeah, Erikson should have just had a single page full of bullet points listing what happened, and then we could all just move on.
Exactly. This series could have been an email.
the Malazan memo of the fallen would be great. Thank you.
Change scary, but necessary. Compassion good, but expensive.
Done and done.
Yeah.
You know what?
Another problem solved.
ChatGPT would have served it up to me just like that.
That's God.
Okay.
Pain.
I think that brings actually to a good transition point, because I feel like I could talk to you about Malazan for hours, and man, it would be delightful. But I also,
well, if you give me a moment to go and get another drink, we can go for another hour.
I was noticing big mug crew. That's a good size goblet there. And I'm into it.
We also have an opportunity because you do have a PhD in fantasy. I want to talk sort of broader about the state of genre storytelling today. I'm curious. I mean, I don't want to put you in a position you don't want to be in, but I'm curious what you think of the genre as it is currently constituted these days.
My thoughts on this are unsurprisingly slightly complicated and not definitive, because again, things develop. But there was this whole discussion about how romantasy is ruining fantasy, and I have no truck with that opinion whatsoever. You go, first of all, romance and fantasy have been mixed together from the beginning. Secondly, all genres go through periods where certain aspects rise in popularity and visibility and then dip down. Ask fans of hard SF how they are feeling about hard SF being written today, because it fell out of popularity. We have an extraordinarily capitalist mentality when it comes to publishing, because it's the publishing industry. And because of that, what sells is what they are going to ask for more of, produce, and promote. So it becomes much more visible. Also, fantasy, as it's run its course, has had a very good run in terms of longevity and variability in the different things it's investigating. And it's never going to go away. There are always going to be texts that are going to use this form of storytelling because it's liberating and freeing. But the idea of the quest fantasy and where it's going, you're like, yeah, someone will come back to it eventually and do something innovative with it. But ultimately, like, we've seen almost every derivation. But I am not worried about the future of fantasy as a genre. I think fantasy storytelling will continue to evolve and morph and highlight new things and then subvert those things and undermine those things, and then a new thing will come up. It will continue to evolve like all genres continue to evolve. And I think that's beautiful and fascinating and wonderful, and it's part of the life cycle of any genre. The thing that I'm seeing a lot of in a lot of genres, actually, not just fantasy, but in a lot of modern publishing, that not necessarily worries me, but I'm a bit saddened by, is there's been a decline in how a lot of the mainstream releases. There's been a decline in the complexity of the literature, that a lot of the mainstream releases seem to be aiming more toward a YA audience, and even the
Yeah.
level of prose for YA. And that's simply to correspond to the market. We know that literacy levels in, let's call it the West, but literacy levels in a number of English speaking countries have dropped. The standard of English, the standard of our ability to read, understand, and engage with texts has dropped. The amount that we read has dropped. There are so many more competing interests that we have. We have these magical little rectangles that live in our pockets that can provide us an endless stream of garbage. And it's entertaining. It's lots of bright lights and flashing things, and it's addictive. Like, and we know that all the studies have shown that. Whereas reading in and of itself, it requires more energy, more focus, more time. And again, in the modern world that we have, a lot of our time is under pressure. We don't have the free time anymore. How many of us are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs? How many of us have, well, our main job and a side gig? And we're under time pressures and social pressures and economic pressures. And so having that privilege to be able to step aside from that, sit down with a book and read, carve out, we even talk about carving out that time in a day. That's becoming increasingly difficult. And so books that focus on being more direct, that on telling us what's happening and being clear about what's happening, it corresponds to a lower level of literacy, but also we don't have to pay as much attention. We don't have to focus on it as much. We don't have to think about it as much because it's easier to follow. That that is something I'm a little saddened by. And again, I don't blame the authors for writing this. They have to make a living. And I'm not even blaming the readers, because if they enjoy it, they enjoy it. What I hope is that they enjoy that and then they find that they want something more and they move on. Like, we have hundreds of thousands of books that have been published in the last 100, 200 years. We have such a rich history of this that there's always more to read and there's always more to find and explore. But the discussion in fantasy that always disappointed me and maybe a little bit depressed was everything had to be a magic system. You're like, it's not a
Yeah.
computer game. It
Right.
doesn't have to be a system. And yet computer games and the computer game logic has influenced so significantly how we think about fantasy. And Lana, I blame you entirely. Because that's dominated. Think of the
Yeah.
at its height of popularity, I think WoW had something like 14 million monthly subscribers. Between 10 and 14 million monthly subscribers. That one computer game had more impact on how the modern audience perceives fantasy than the Lord of the Rings did.
Yeah.
Because magic has to be replicable. Magic has to have these rules. The reader needs to know how to use the magic. You're like, why? They're not controlling the player.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't it be a surprise? Because it cannot be a surprise in a computer game. Because that would be incredibly frustrating. Oh, look, it worked last time, but it won't work this time. I'm dead. I have to do it all again.
Yeah.
But that systemization, the everything has to be built around rules, and it can be fun. Like reading lit RPGs, and I've because people talked about them, I went and read a whole load. And they were it was a fun thing for a little bit. And then after that, they are incredibly samey and incredibly
Yeah.
gimmicky, and it falls
Right.
to the same thing. And so, again, the joy in it is, well, the narratorial voice. And you go, right, but you can do that narratorial voice without all of this stuff. If that's the good thing, ditch the rules, go and do something else. Write a compelling story. Or the insistence that complicated language, oh, it's prose, it should be simple. You're like, no, I'm not 8 years old. I can enjoy the complexity and richness of the language. Does it have to be every book? Of course not. But when a book has it, stop putting your nose up and going, oh, it's purple prose. Go away. Let us enjoy the variety that we can actually have. The genre has room for all of these things. And I think because of the current structure of publishing, that has narrowed it significantly as to what is in the modern eye, what is easily visible. But the genre is still there. There are still these books being written by fantastic authors. There are still all of these different styles and approaches. There's still all of these different stories. There are subversions. There are subversions of subversions. There are deconstructions. There are subversions of deconstructions of tropes. Like, there is so much room and variety to play with it. But I think as you both kind of pointed out, your expectations reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen, well, hang on, this isn't, where's my main character? Where is the ultimate end goal? This should be a series or a serial. And when someone says, have you read Ian M. Banks' culture books? You don't think the same character is going to be in all of the different things, that it's a continuation of the same story. And yet when it comes to fantasy, the mere idea that each individual book is its own thing. And yes, it fits into a wider world. It fits into a grander narrative arc. But ultimately, it's focused on its own thing. And yet people complain about that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has its strengths. It means that there are all of these different things each time in each book that are going to appeal to us. But it also has its weakness in that if you really like this particular style and approach that's in this book, there is no guarantee it is ever going to appear again.
Mm-hmm.
When we think of that serialized storytelling that is so prevalent with what we call a fantasy series, it's one narrative form, but because it became, again, so dominant, the idea of deviation causes dissatisfaction, and we read against what is happening. We go, but it should be doing this thing. Instead of going, hang on, I just thought it should be doing this thing. Why did I think that? Oh, that's absolutely terrible. That shouldn't have happened. Why shouldn't have happened? Each time we stumble on one of these points, I dislike this. Why do you dislike it? It should spark the question why, to make us more self-aware, not only of our own preferences, but how we made that judgment. Every judgment has a set of criteria. And if we don't know what criteria we are applying, we are blind to all of these things. We just go, oh, that's bad writing. Why is it bad writing? Well, it's not concise enough. But why should it be concise? Well, concise is good. Why? Because it gets it over faster. Like, is the purpose of art to do it quickly?
Yeah.
Well, no.
I love that all everything you're saying is so resonant, but in particular, yeah, that wanting to have experience art that gives me follow-up questions that I'm excited to explore. But, the phones and the instant gratification and getting the likes, getting the clicks, like whatever it is people are getting that from, I think those expectations and getting that writing down to that YA level, it's also, I think, the continued stresses and sort of various traumas people are experiencing. It's not even necessarily coming down to a taste thing, but any resistance to getting your brain as far away from as possible from what you are otherwise experiencing in your normal life. It feels like another sort of lever that is getting people down the simplest possible solution, the first thought fantasy, the most base level storytelling that you could have to get enough of an interest to get your brain into a world that is not your own. And I think that the spike in that and people's enjoyment of the really easy reading is because there's so much friction everywhere. letting your brain just slide through a story and being like, that was great, is like another big part of that. Like the continued pressures and weight and pain experienced by the world right now. I get why people want that easy lever to pull. But if this book club has taught me anything, is the delight in having, well, I'm going to get the quote wrong, but a secret and private pleasure of thinking and dwelling and spending this time with myself. And then, of course, getting to share it with Jeff and with everybody. I really hope that there's some kind of relief to that soon enough that people can start having enough space in their minds and their hearts to enjoy that experience.
You can imagine if you spent all day stressing but working on computers, then the last thing you want to do when you come home is, oh, I'm going to sit down and stare at another computer screen. That you want to move away from that. If you spent all day, quite often a lot of what I'm doing is I'm sitting reading stuff and doing that, then the last thing I want to do at the end of the day is come home and go faced with a really complex text that I'm going to need.
Yeah.
You're like, you know what? I want to read something. Oh, look, they pulled their blaster and shot them in the face. You're like, it's
Woo!
simple and straightforward. There is a joy in all this. There's a place in all this.
Yeah.
The thing that worries me is when that becomes the expectation for what it all should be.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm like, no, there's room for it. But when you say this is what fantasy should be, no, fantasy, epic fantasy, grimdark fantasy, romantasy, quest fantasy, adventure fantasy, mythological fantasy, fairy tale fantasy. Fantasy is the broadest of genres that has room under this giant umbrella for all forms of elves and pixies and dragons. But how many times have you seen someone say it's not a dragon, it's a wyvern because it only has 4 limbs?
Yeah.
Okay, you go, fine, that's from heraldry and not this fantasy text. In this fantasy text, dragons have 4 limbs. But that's a wyvern. They got it wrong. They should have done more research. I'm like, and you should take the stick out of your butt.
Exactly. Yeah. The fire exploded from their fingers. We can have whatever we want here. That's fine. We can do it.
Well, if you think about the physics of, say, ice magic and fireball magic, ice magic makes sense because you're absorbing all of the heat from around it, which you can explain with thermodynamics. Fire magic, where's the energy coming from?
Yeah.
So it's not that you're you're applying ice to something. You're just withdrawing all of the heat and energy from it. That's what makes the cold and makes everything around it cold. But how do you heat things up? Well, you need to expend energy to do that. So, I'm going to take the energy from the fire. What do you mean you're going to take the energy from the fire? What, from the what?
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
And you go,
love. But that's why it's magic. Magic doesn't have to follow physics.
That's not science.
I did love, by the way, just the super nerdy comment. One of my favorite, there's an X-Men villain named Pyro. He can't make fire, but he can shape it. And I was like, that's cool. I like that.
Which makes him more powerful than the Human Torch.
That's right.
Because the Human Torch is on fire and he just goes out.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh, gosh.
Amazing. So that leads us to the next place, which is Lana and I have this dilemma now.
Well, before we spin into that, and maybe it's related, I have one question that we got from the community for you from JFrid88. And so this might end up wrapping into what we're about to talk about. But here's a question for AP. There's a common sentiment among bookish types about wishing you could read something again for the first time. But I believe that with the best books, the first read is just where you start, and the real reward is the rereading. What's one book or series you wish you could read again for the first time? And what book or series are you grateful to have earned the rereads?
There is no book or series that I sort of go, I really wish I could read this again without knowing. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a weird thing in my brain, but one of the things that happens when I read is like I can sort of shut off my knowledge of what is about to happen in the book if I want to. I don't know why, but I can sometimes do this. But the other thing is quite often the joy I get from reading. And I've read Gardens of the Moon a number of times, and I know basically what's going to happen in Gardens of the Moon. I'm not reading for what happens.
Mm.
I am reading for part of the experience, what it's making me think, what it's making me feel. And I am not the same person today that I was yesterday. I am not the same person today that I was 10 years ago. How I thought and felt when I read Gardens of the Moon then is not the same as I feel now. And how I was when I read it the very first time, I was an entirely different person. Because one of the things I think shows through in how you both react to certain scenes, we connect to what's happening in the text. And when I was a lot younger, I was more in line, say, at the beginning with Crocus. Crocus was more in line with who I was, young and dumb and absolutely oblivious of nuance.
Yeah.
Reading it now, I'm potentially more in line with Whiskey Jack. Tired and worried and looking at things going, this is much more like, you're so young and stupid. Like, stop doing that. Like, this is complicated and it's tiring. That even the characters I identify with or who I empathize more with have changed over time and what my experiences are. And I'm sure, like Jeff, you might have noticed this, but when children are involved, you cannot separate yourself from your experiences being a parent.
That's right. Yeah.
And it makes you see those scenes so radically differently than, say, someone like me. I don't have my own kid. I have nephews, I have nieces, I love them very dearly, but that's not quite the same, is it?
Yeah. Right.
And then there are people out there who don't have kids or are way too young to even be thinking about having kids. And so how each of us sees that and resonates with it, that to me makes reading new each and every time.
Yeah.
Because it's not, if it was just about what happened in a book, I could read a plot summary.
Yeah.
I don't want the plot summary. It's not the, unless it's a whodunit, unless it's a murder mystery where there's a big reveal at the end, unless there's some reason why the plot reveal at the end is the be all and end all. Those are the only books I sort of, and even then, a lot of Agatha Christie ones, it's actually in the reread, there's the pleasure because you're specifically looking out for
the clues.
The clues to that. What did I miss the first time around?
Right.
But for me, almost every single time I read a book, whether I read it once or 5 times, that there is something new and different in that experience. And that's what thrills me and engages me with literature. I don't feel that when I watch films. I don't feel that when I play computer games. I don't react to those things the same way, that they are much more in the experience of consumption. Or I have mastered the techniques and now can speed run the whole thing, or the satisfaction of something being well done. That's what a lot of those things are. But with reading, I'm a different person each time. And so the experience is different each time. What makes me cry or what makes me laugh is not always the same each time. And that makes each book new every single time I read it or reread it. It's a new narrative because I'm a new reader. And while the text has not changed, I have changed. And therefore, my interpretation of the text has changed. My understanding of the text has changed. And the meaning that I take from the text has changed. It is new. So every read of the book is a new read.
That's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Love it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I sometimes wonder how much differently I would have thought about the Malazan Book of the Fallen had I read it when I put it on my Goodreads TBR 10 years ago. It's actually more now, 13 years ago.
Wow.
When you were in your early 19s.
I wish. I wish. No, but it was before children, right? It was before my son is 10 or 9. He'll be 10 this year. And, I think so much of that vulnerability, that rawness, that openness that Malazan asks of you, and I was able to bring to it, I think I may not have at that time. And I I think I almost certainly would have still enjoyed it, but I don't think it would have touched me as deeply as it has, you know.
And even as we explored it, it was very interesting for me to be reading and being like, I bet this hit Jeff big time, and like seeing which scenes from you. And I remember one that still I think surprised me, like how hard it hit you, was Bolt's sort of ending in the book, where he flew away as the sparrow.
Incredible.
And that, I remember at the time, hit
Free
me
bird
so hard. And me being like, it's interesting to see this resonate with you, and just trying to digest how that resonated with you and why that resonated with you and why that was so powerful for you, where I was like, oh, beautiful. And you were like hit by it.
Lana's always trying to understand the olds, AP, you know?
Oh,
what do the olds think about it?
I'm so full of youthful vigor.
You guys were talking about like rating and ranking various books, and I've never done it. It's like, how would you rank these? They're all A tier. Aren't you going to use S tier? No, I'm not Korean, and this isn't a computer game. Sorry, I'm old. I'm completely unaware of what S tier is because I've had my head under a rock for the last 20 years. But or trying to pick out your favorite scenes. And again, like I think Gardens of the Moon, if I had to pick one book from the series that I was the only one I was allowed to reread, I would reread Gardens of the Moon over and over again. And no one can ever understand this.
Wow.
But Gardens of the Moon for me is the entire series in vitro. It is the promises of the entire series. It contains so many different elements, and I can see how they are expanded through the rest of the series. If I had to pick one of the other books, it would be Toll the Hound.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do essentially with the treatment of death and loss. And that, like, I hope everyone has warm, brilliant, fulfilling, loving lives and never have to cope with loss. But it happens to all of us. And when I read that, it resonated with things that had happened in my past. And the emotion tied up in that, I cannot separate myself from. And so when I read that emotion comes running back. But if I think of some of my favorite scenes, like we could list all of these different scenes. Oh yeah, that's a brilliant scene. Like Beak. People online have said, oh, that's just the author deliberately playing with your emotions. You go, congratulations, you've discovered what an author does. But it was so artificial. And you go, what are you talking about? The pieces for that are laid all the way through the entire book. Yeah. And then there's this payoff. And for the people who respond to that, okay, maybe you personally aren't responding to it. That's fine. You don't have to. But don't dismiss other people's emotion and resonance with it, because how that hits me and the points in my life and moments that connects to, no one else experiences those the way that I do. And I can see that connection, and those feelings come flooding back, and it's a catharsis. It's a way of experiencing those emotions in a less destructive form and a more private and controlled form. But if I think of like how many people pick I am so sorry. How many people pick the dinner scene in Gardens of the Moon as one of their favorite scenes in the series? And I do, because there you have Lorne, the adjunct, choosing between duty as the adjunct and who she is as a person, Lorne. You have Tattersail, who had been ordered to do something, but offering herself up, knowing that it would kill her. You have Dujek weighing in and going, you're not allowed to do this because we have duty, versus the entire byplay around that scene is all about what should we sacrifice? What is the cost of sacrifice? Lorne cannot understand what Tattersail went through. Tattersail cannot help but feel what Lorne went through. And we see this whole consideration of empathy, this whole consideration of the cost of empathy, this whole consideration of this terrible thing was done, someone should pay. That it all happens in that sequence. And I love that sequence. And yet I've heard so many people criticize it. Oh, it's full of head hopping. Oh, it's badly written. Oh, it does. You're like, okay, but from my point of view, it is masterfully written because it keeps the position moving around, and it's all witnessed by talk.
Mhm.
The one-eyed, the person who has technically the worst eyesight is our witness to it.
Yeah.
And then we can compare that scene to where Cotillion is carrying the body of the claw, or sorry, the talon, and Crocus is carrying Apsalar, and this is on Drift Valley. And they're both walking down the path towards each other and meet. And you think of all of the symbolism of what happens in that scene, and the fact that the two assassins are walking holding these two women, and how these women that they say that they love, and how their love essentially led to these women being in the position that they're in. There's all of this complication of that scene. And then when Crocus and Apsalar leave, it's followed by this moment where we get our only sequence where Shadow Throne drops all pretense as he speaks to Cotillion over the body of one of their followers, and he is genuinely remorseful for what they have caused. And there's no giggling, there's no maniacal stuff. It's a moment of raw honesty from someone who puts on a persona so often that it's what they've become. And yet this scene is so raw and emotional that Erikson gives Shadow Throne that moment to be absolutely human and true. And like those scenes stand out to me so much, and yet they are never in people's top 10. They're never in people's top 20 because they're not the big scenes. They're not the epic scenes. They're not the dramatic scenes. They're not even the most emotional of scenes. But there's a resonance to those scenes that each time I come across them, I'm blown away by because they make me think about other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, we'll reread them.
Damn it! We gotta reread Guards of the Moon now. So eloquent and so beautifully put. My goodness. But I think that does bring us to our task that we'd like to set before you. We have to figure out what to read next, and we're here at the feet of an expert. Or at least someone who has a vast library of knowledge on this topic.
A little bit of knowledge.
Yeah. What did I know? You're a fan of Jenny Wirtz. I've never read any of her stuff. I don't want to put any ideas in your head, but I'm curious what you would think would be a wonderful next step for us.
Okay. Well, one thing before I launch into this, I think both you and Lana should go back and reread the prologue and chapter 1 of Gardens of the Moon. Knowing what you know now, you don't have to read that. I'm not saying launch into a whole reread of the series. But
it's a slippery slope, baby. It's a slippery slope.
Bring them in. They'll just have a taste and then they'll be hooked. But just reread the prologue and chapter 1. And looking at it with how you understand Erikson's writing style now, how you understand his modes of communication, how you understand what happens and who these people are. Looking at it with those eyes, I would be genuinely interested if you see that prologue and chapter 1, if you see it differently and suddenly go, this is a different book than the one that we read.
Wow. Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that out. I would be fascinated to hear your thoughts on it because I know some people, when they go back and reread it, go, I did not see any of this. Suddenly, it's a completely different thing. Yeah. But before suggesting anything that you should go on and read, the question I would have is, what is it that you want to do? Because if you have just finished an absolutely epic read of an epic fantasy series, so do you want to carry on in that vein with another huge project, or would you want to do, well, can we do 2 or 3 smaller projects as a bit of a reset, a bit of a breather, and then we're going to choose our next big one? Because if you launch straight into another big one now, said the actress to the bishop, are you going to burn out? Is it going to be too much to launch into the next major epic?
That is my inclination as well, is to maybe do 1 or 2 shorter, maybe a one-off single novel, or just a shorter something. I'm open to the audience's input on this, obviously, but I think even just from the perspective of getting folks to jump on board with us, I think it's daunting for viewers to be like, hey, we're doing a book club. We're doing 10 novel series. And oh, okay. But, just having a jumping on point, it would be lovely too.
And the second thing would be, do you want it to be fantasy? You've just finished this massive fantasy thing. Do you want to just have it change up and read a science fiction, or you could read horror, like you'd be weird. It's the one genre I don't like. I'm a big scaredy cat. I'm afraid of things. I don't like them living in my head. So why do I want to read them? I'm never reading horror. But so
I think Lana is leaning toward doing sci-fi next. I'll put that out there.
I'll say I'm ultimately flexible. I'm a sci-fi girl. I love the sci-fi. But I mean, even when Jeff was like, should we read these books? I was like, sure. Should I purchase all 10 right now? And Jeff was like, what if we hate it? Don't buy all 10. I was ready to buy literally one big book on my Kindle. So I'm very, very flexible. Whatever we're reading, I'll read it, baby.
Oh, look at that. Lana bragging about how flexible she is to the two old men going, but my hip is sore.
Yeah. I'm tired just thinking about it.
My joints are basically still rubber.
Because one of the things that is interesting. So Robin Hobb's Elderlings, the Realm of the Elderlings, but it is broken up into self-contained sections. So you could read the first trilogy, and then that is a natural breaking point because the next trilogy is different. So you would have, in terms of project, like they are still big books. I like big books, and I cannot lie, even better when they're a trilogy. But it's epic fantasy. It's, again, very, very well written. It's not your stereotypical, because it's called Assassin's Apprentice is the first one. And I remember seeing a review somewhere where someone was like absolutely complaining about this, going, it has nothing to do with that. You're like, you go through the blurb on the back, and I can explain every element as it occurs in the book and go, the blurb is not a lie. Your misconception about what that blurb means, that's a you problem, not a writing problem.
Fascinating.
So it's a much more sedate book, and it's a lot of looking into how it's well written, and again, unreliable narration and considering things from different perspectives. So that's interesting. Jani Wirtz is an author I have enormous respect for. I'm reading through her Wars of Light and Shadow, and her use of language is a sheer joy for me. But again, it's one of those series where it's not necessarily about the big climactic thing. It's about how all of these different pieces fit together. So again, you could do a sampler plate. We're going to do this. We're going to do a sequence of book ones or books one. Is it books one like courts martial, or is it book one?
I think it's books one.
Books one.
Where you could do that. If you wanted to stay within the Malazan world but have something a bit different, there's the novellas of Bauchlein and Corbel Broach, which are very, very short. The first three are essentially different genres but set in the Malazan world. So and they are fun, they are silly, they are... You met Bauchlein and Corbel Broach, you know what they're like.
Yeah.
They are insane. And of course, I a character that is not me, called Apu Canavalian, turns up eventually in that series.
So big plug for you. Right in there. I love it.
It is so wonderful now that everyone knows that character is based on me. I can't thank Steve enough for that. It is such a joy to be the miserable art critic who gets made fun of and is a sniveling card.
It's so funny. I'm taking notes on all your thoughts here as well.
But what I thought would be interesting, again, Guy Gavriel Kay, in particular, some of his one of the, say, later either duologies or books, because historical fantasy, it reads very differently, and a lot
I've read Tigana.
Everyone's read Tigana. Lana, have you read Tigana?
All right.
I'm just so young, I don't know anything.
So, Jeff, nearly everyone has already read Tagana.
Well, I just wanted to say I read a little bit of Guy Granville Kyle.
And one of the things, again, that I love about Kay's writing, like Johnny Wirtz, although in a very different way, his writing has such lyricism to it that he's writing almost with poetry. And because of that, you again are having a book club is the perfect way to read it, where you're taking this time in between, that you're thinking about, I'm only doing one chapter or two chapters. You have time to think through and appreciate it, rather than, oh, we're going to blaze through this whole thing and then we have an hour and a half and we're going to talk about all of the high points.
Right.
That I'm thinking of what fits your format would be books that really benefit from that thoughtful approach of taking it slowly, giving yourself time to think about it. And so authors like Robin Hobb, Johnny Wirtz, Guy Gavriel Kay, they are ones that I think are great, particularly for thoughtful, interesting writing. If you wanted some interesting, different ones, Joe Abercrombie writes fascinating works, particularly because of the psychological vocalization that's used in his narration, and it's a real hallmark of it. So again, there's complexities around what we mean by unreliable narrator, but I like a lot of Joe Abercrombie's work, but it is again of the sort of the darker epic fantasy type. And do you really want to carry on in that vein?
Right.
I think changing it up in terms of tone might be fun.
He's high on my list. I think, Jeff, you have read Joe Abercrombie.
I have. I did First Law. Wasn't my favorite. I'll be honest. I know Against the Grain wasn't my favorite, but
it's one of the things I love about it. When I finished that trilogy and I went, this is just absolutely ripping the piss out of the Lord of the Rings.
Yes,
and I really love that, because again, studying what I studied, there's such huge veneration for Tolkien that quite often Tolkien gets a pass where everyone else gets torn to pieces. And reading Moorcock and Moorcock's opinion of Tolkien is refreshing, because he is so venerated within my area of study. And I love Tolkien, but at the same time, there's a very, let's call it an old-fashioned sense of perspective on what the heroes do in Tolkien.
Sure. Yeah.
And in the modern day, it can be interesting to think about things from a slightly different perspective. But yeah, those would be authors who I would recommend off the top of my head. In terms of changing genre slightly, the space opera would be a nice one to dip into. One of the, I'm not saying this series in particular, but like the Honor Harrington series, but one of the, here's our hero, they're going out, their spaceships, they're going to blow stuff up. And it is
like Peter F. Hamilton.
Completely I think you need to stop that series. Maybe is it about 5 in or 6 in before you go, this is not suitable to discuss on YouTube. YouTube After Dark. But they're finding a different type of literature, because it brings out different ways to approach reading. And one of the things I try to encourage people to do is read broadly, because one of the struggles some people had with Erickson, they go, but this isn't how fantasy should be written. And you're like, but this technique is so common in short story writing, and this technique is so common in literary fiction, and this technique's really common here. And they're like, but it's not in fantasy. You're like, well, why not? Like, these are really common techniques, but because of the genreification of the market, if you think back 60 years ago, if you were reading fantasy, you were also reading science fiction and horror, because it was all just like, these were the things we could get our hands on. But now, if you're interested in a very narrow niche, you can find thousands of narratives corresponding to just that niche. So you can read that niche for the next 10 years without ever once having to wander anywhere. And that ossifies our ability to understand and engage with narrative in different formats and different genres. But also, when someone tells a story in a way that we're not expecting, we aren't flexible enough in our thinking. And that's having a bit of a change of genre, I think, might be fun.
Yeah,
But
I
then
agree with that.
how does that affect your audience? Your audience were with you for the Malazan stuff. Do they want to listen to science fiction?
I hope so.
Is that how you're going to do it? For me, if it was up to me, the joy I get from this, it's not necessarily going to be in what book or book series or trilogy or duology that you pick. The joy is going to be reading that book and then being there each week to hear your thoughts and your engagement with it, because you are thoughtful, you are intelligent, and also you respond with a level of honesty and authenticity that makes it an absolute joy to be with you as you discuss these things. That is the joy of this. Not necessarily this is the world's greatest book, but this is the shared experience we have, and this is the thing that we are using to bring us together to have the conversation and to have fun and to catch up and to have that moment of humanity and compassion and joy and sharing in a world that kind of seems at times a little bit crazy and a little bit difficult to deal with. That this is an aspect of normalcy. So even if you picked Winnie the Pooh, which is and it's a beautiful book. Everyone can read Winnie the Pooh, and there are still ways to discuss that. It doesn't have to be James Joyce's Ulysses. It doesn't have to be The Third Policeman by Flann O'Brien. Oh, let's talk about metaphysical fantasy.
Wednesday Warriors, baby.
Exactly.
My son's suggestion, yes.
I would tune in. I would go and buy a copy of that book. I would read it, and I would tune in. Because it's not necessarily about the book. It is the joy of reading. It is the joy of sharing our experiences and our thoughts. And it's the joy of hearing someone else talk through it and go, I didn't see that before, but that's given me new insight. It's not necessarily the book, it's the company. Or The Black Company by
Well, I can't think of a better way to end our discussion. That was lovely and eloquent and beautiful. And it has been an absolute joy. Everything you just said is how I feel about having this discussion with you. And my goodness, we have to do this more often. I would love to talk to you on camera much more frequently, because it is so enlightening, enriching, and just a joy. So thank you, AP Canavan, for being here. You can, well, why don't you plug your channel for everybody?
don't listen to my stuff. Listen to Jeff and Lana.
Oh,
they're
stop.
the only.
my God.
No, they are the. I am serious. When I talk about books on my channel, it's me talking about the things that I'm interested in. But when I hear you guys talk, it's a conversation about what is meaningful to you. And that transcends the intellectual or slightly academic approach that I take. So that's why I say watching you is better than listening to my stuff.
I disagree, but I appreciate you saying that. It's very kind of you to say.
Oh my
but
God.
I'm not going to let you get out of here without you understanding how much I get from your channel and how much, like I said, that half an hour discussion that you just did off the cuff of shadow and the mutability in Malazan was just incredibly illuminating for me. And it is just one example of this magical resource that you have on your channel of great discussions, great guests, and really in-depth discussion about the stuff we all love. So
and the work that you do helps, people like me who are not very smart about it digest the way I feel, helps me analyze and think even deeper about the things that are meaningful to me and helping parse through those feelings. So big +1. So delightful to talk with you. And thank you for everything that you do.
Indeed. And if you haven't, and you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to A Critical Dragon, please go do that. It'll make your life a lot better. Thanks everybody for watching. Next week, we have the man himself, Stephen Erickson, back with us to talk about the Crippled God and so much more. It's going to be a blast.
Don't listen to Stephen Erickson. He's a liar.
Oh, man. I don't want to be in the middle of this. You're tearing me apart. See you later, everybody.